The morning sun barely peeked through the gray clouds as Linda sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills that seemed to grow taller each day. 6 months pregnant and alone, she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Just 3 months ago, her life had been completely different. She lived in a beautiful house with her husband David, planning for their first child together, dreaming about the nursery they would create. Everything changed in a single moment. David had been working late at the office when he suddenly collapsed. The doctors said it was a massive heart attack. At 32 years old, he was gone before the ambulance even arrived. Linda's world shattered into a million pieces that night. The funeral was a blur of flowers, condolences, and legal papers. Linda discovered that while David had been a loving husband, he wasn't great with paperwork. The medical bills from his final hospital stay were enormous. The funeral costs ate through most of their savings. Their beautiful home, which they had bought just 2 years earlier, came with mortgage payments that Linda couldn't afford on her part-time job at the local library. She had no choice but to sell the house. The real estate agent assured her it was a good decision. "You'll get a fresh start," the woman had said with a sympathetic smile. "Sometimes that's exactly what we need after a loss." What the agent didn't know, and what Linda was still trying to understand herself, was that David's family had left him something valuable. His grandfather had been a smart businessman who bought several small apartment buildings around the city, back in the 1980s when prices were low. When David's father passed away 5 years earlier, those properties went to David, and now they belonged to Linda. The family lawyer, Mr. Peterson, had explained everything to her during one of those horrible weeks after the funeral. "You own 4 apartment buildings," he had told her gently. "They're all in decent neighborhoods and they bring in good rental income. Your husband was using a property management company to handle everything, so you might not have even known about the monthly deposits." Linda had been shocked. She remembered David mentioning something about family properties, but she never understood what that meant. She had assumed it was just sentimental stuff, maybe an old family home somewhere. She never imagined she was now the owner of dozens of apartments across the city. The rental income was enough to live on, but Linda felt disconnected from it all. She had never been a landlord. She didn't know anything about managing properties or dealing with tenants. The management company handled everything, sending her monthly reports that she barely understood. She felt like she was living someone else's life. That's when she got an idea that would change everything. One of the buildings was in Riverside District, a working-class neighborhood about 20 minutes from her old house. It was a 3-story brick building with 12 apartments. The management company told her that one of the smaller units had just become available. It was a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor, perfect for someone starting over. "I want to live there," Linda announced during a phone call with Mr. Peterson. The lawyer was quiet for a moment. "Linda, are you sure you could afford a much nicer place with your rental income? This building is, well, it's not exactly luxury living." "That's exactly why I want to be there," Linda replied. "I need to understand what my tenants are going through. I need to know if the building is being maintained properly. And honestly, I need to get away from all the memories." Her old neighborhood was full of couples with babies, perfect families that reminded her of what she had lost. Every walk to the mailbox meant running into neighbors who looked at her with pity and asked how she was holding up. She was tired of being the tragic widow that everyone whispered about. Mr. Peterson helped her set up the arrangement. Officially, Linda would be just another tenant. The property management company would handle her rent payments just like everyone else's, although obviously the money was just moving from one of her accounts to another. Only Mr. Peterson and the head of the management company knew who she really was. "If anyone asks, you're just Linda Wilson, a new tenant," Mr. Peterson advised. "Your maiden name will help keep things simple." Moving day was both terrifying and liberating. Linda packed her life into boxes, keeping only the essentials and a few precious memories of David. The fancy furniture from her old house went into storage. The expensive clothes that no longer fit her pregnant body were donated to charity. She wanted to start fresh, to live simply. The apartment was small but clean. The kitchen had old appliances, but they worked fine. The bedroom was just big enough for a bed and a dresser. There was a tiny second room that would be perfect for the baby. The building itself was older, probably built in the 1970s, but it was well maintained. The hallways were clean, the stairs were sturdy, and the other tenants seemed quiet and respectful. Linda's first week in the building was an education. She learned that Mrs. Rodriguez in 2A worked 2 jobs to support her teenage son. The young man in 3C was attending community college and worked at a grocery store on weekends. The elderly gentleman in 1B was a retired veteran who kept the most beautiful plants on his small balcony. These weren't the lazy, irresponsible people that some politicians talked about on TV. These were hard-working individuals and families who were doing their best to get by. They paid their rent on time, kept their apartments clean, and looked out for each other. Linda also learned about the challenges they faced. The laundry room in the basement had 2 machines that broke down regularly. The parking lot had potholes that made it difficult for Mrs. Rodriguez to navigate with her grocery cart. The mailboxes were old and some of the locks were broken, making residents worry about mail theft. She started keeping a notebook, writing down every problem she noticed and every complaint she overheard. The property management company was doing an okay job, but they weren't going above and beyond. They fixed things when tenants complained officially, but they missed the small problems that could become big ones. Linda found herself feeling more connected to this building and these people than she had felt to anything in months. When Mrs. Rodriguez struggled with heavy grocery bags, Linda helped carry them upstairs. When the college student looked stressed about exams, Linda offered to share some homemade soup. When the elderly veteran mentioned that he missed having someone to talk to, Linda started joining him on his evening walks around the block. For the first time since David's death, Linda felt like she had a purpose. She wasn't just collecting rent money. She was part of a community. These people were counting on her, even though they didn't know it yet. But living anonymously also meant experiencing some of the less pleasant aspects of apartment life. She overheard conversations in the hallways that she never would have heard as an absent landlord. She witnessed interactions between tenants that revealed personality conflicts and social tensions. One tenant in particular stood out as a problem. He lived in apartment 3B, directly above her. He was a man in his 30s who drove an expensive car and wore nice suits, but treated his neighbors with obvious contempt. Linda often heard him making loud phone calls where he complained about living around these people. He referred to the building as a temporary situation until he could find somewhere more suitable. This tenant was consistently late with his rent, according to the reports Linda received from the management company. He had also generated several noise complaints from other residents. But because he eventually paid his rent, and because his complaints never escalated to serious incidents, the management company treated him as just a minor annoyance. Linda watched him interact with other tenants and felt her stomach turn. He was rude to Mrs. Rodriguez, often making comments about people who don't speak English properly. He complained loudly about the college students' late-night study sessions. Even though the young man was barely audible, he seemed to take special pleasure in making the elderly veteran feel unwelcome, muttering about government handouts whenever the older man was within earshot. As her pregnancy progressed and her belly grew larger, Linda found herself moving, more slowly, and needing more help with daily tasks. The other tenants were wonderful. Mrs. Rodriguez often insisted on helping her carry groceries. The college student always held doors open for her. The elderly veteran made sure she had his phone number just in case, but the man in 3B seemed to view her pregnancy as a personal insult. She caught him staring at her with disgust when she walked through the lobby. She heard him on phone calls complaining about welfare mothers moving into the building. He seemed to assume that because she was young, pregnant, and alone, she must be irresponsible and dependent on government assistance. Linda had never experienced this kind of prejudice before. In her old neighborhood, pregnancy was celebrated. People offered congratulations and asked about baby names. Here, at least from this one tenant, she felt judged and unwanted. She thought about revealing her identity and having him evicted immediately. It would be easy. One call to the management company and he would be gone by the end of the month. But something held her back. She wanted to see how far his behavior would go. She wanted to understand exactly what kind of person he was. Kevin Martinez had always believed he was destined for bigger things. Sitting in his apartment on the third floor of the Riverside building, he looked around at the modest furnishings and felt a familiar surge of frustration. This wasn't supposed to be his life. At 35, he should be living in a luxury condo downtown, not sharing walls with people who worked at grocery stores and fast food restaurants. Kevin worked as a claims adjuster for Metropolitan Insurance Company. It was a decent job that paid well enough, but it wasn't the executive position he had imagined for himself when he graduated from college 13 years ago. Every day, he dealt with people who had experienced accidents, disasters, or unexpected problems. His job was to investigate their claims and determine how much money the insurance company should pay out. Over the years, this work had made Kevin cynical and hard. He had seen too many people trying to exaggerate their claims, too many attempts to get money they didn't deserve. In his mind, most people were either liars or losers, and often both. He prided himself on being tough, on catching fraudsters, and saving his company money. Kevin's colleagues had mixed feelings about him. He was good at his job, thorough in his investigations, and successful at keeping claim payouts low. Management appreciated his results, but his coworkers found him difficult to work with. He was quick to criticize others, slow to offer help, and had a habit of making harsh comments about the people whose claims they were processing. "Look at this idiot," Kevin would say, reviewing a claim from someone who had been injured in a car accident. Probably texting while driving. Now taxpayers have to pay for his stupidity through higher insurance rates. His supervisor had spoken to him several times about his attitude. "Kevin, you need to remember that these are real people going through difficult times," she would say. A little compassion goes a long way. But Kevin saw compassion as weakness. In his view, the world was divided into winners and losers, and he was determined to be a winner. He drove a leased BMW that ate up a significant portion of his salary. He wore expensive suits that he bought on credit. He ate at upscale restaurants and bragged about his lifestyle on social media. The problem was that Kevin's lifestyle cost more than he could actually afford. The fancy car payment, the designer, clothes, the expensive dinners out, it all added up. He was living paycheck to paycheck, but he refused to admit it or change his spending habits. This financial stress had contributed to the end of his relationship with Jessica, his girlfriend of 2 years. Jessica was a teacher who lived within her means and had tried to encourage Kevin to be more responsible with money. "We could have a great life together if you just stopped trying to impress everyone," she had told him during their final argument. "You spend more on car payments than I spend on rent. It's crazy." But Kevin had seen Jessica's practical approach to life as small-minded. "I'm not going to live like some peasant just because you're scared of success," he had shot back. "Some of us have bigger dreams than teaching second grade forever." Jessica had left him 6 months ago, and Kevin still felt bitter about it. In his mind, she had abandoned him because she couldn't handle being with someone who had ambition. He refused to consider that maybe his attitude and behavior had been the real problem. Living in the Riverside building was supposed to be temporary. Kevin had moved there 2 years ago when his previous landlord raised his rent. He had planned to stay for 6 months, maybe a year, while he looked for something better. But between his car payment, credit card debt, and expensive lifestyle, he couldn't save enough money for a security deposit on a nicer place. The building itself wasn't terrible, but Kevin felt embarrassed by the address. When people asked where he lived, he would give vague answers about the Riverside area, without mentioning that he lived in an older apartment building. When dates wanted to come to his place, he would suggest meeting at restaurants or going to their apartments instead. Kevin's rent was $200 per month for a one-bedroom apartment, which was actually reasonable for the area. But even that amount was often difficult for him to manage. He had been late with his rent payments multiple times, sometimes by weeks. The management company had sent him warning letters, but they hadn't evicted him because he always eventually paid up. What made Kevin's financial situation worse was his pride. He refused to acknowledge that he was struggling even to himself. Instead of cutting back on expenses, he found ways to blame external factors for his problems, The economy was bad. His company didn't pay him enough. The government taxed him too heavily. It was everyone else's fault except his own. This attitude extended to how Kevin viewed his neighbors in the building. In his mind, they were all beneath him socially and professionally. Mrs. Rodriguez worked as a housekeeper and a part-time cashier to support her son. Kevin saw this as proof that she was uneducated and lazy, rather than recognizing it as evidence of her incredible work ethic. The college student in 3C reminded Kevin of his own failures. Here was a young man working his way through school, studying hard and building toward a better future. Instead of admiring this dedication, Kevin felt threatened by it. He complained about the student's late-night studying, claiming it was disruptive even though the young man was barely audible. Kevin was particularly harsh toward the elderly veteran in 1B. The older man received disability payments and Social Security, which Kevin viewed as government handouts. He couldn't see past his own prejudices to understand that this man had served his country and deserved support in his later years. But it was the pregnant young woman in 2B who triggered Kevin's worst instincts. Linda had moved into the building 6 months ago, and from the moment Kevin saw her, he made assumptions about her situation. Young, pregnant, and apparently living alone, in Kevin's narrow worldview, this could only mean one thing. She was another welfare mother taking advantage of the system. Kevin had never actually spoken to Linda or learned anything about her real situation. He didn't know about her recent loss, her property ownership, or her college education. He saw what he expected to see and filled in the blanks with his own biases and prejudices. When Kevin saw Linda struggling with grocery bags or moving slowly up the stairs, he didn't see a woman dealing with the physical challenges of pregnancy. He saw someone who was lazy and looking for handouts. When other neighbors helped her, Kevin viewed it as enabling bad behavior. Kevin's resentment toward Linda grew stronger as his own life became more stressful. At work, his supervisor had started questioning some of his claim decisions. A few, people whose claims Kevin had denied, had appealed successfully, which reflected poorly on his judgment. There were rumors that the company might be restructuring, which could mean layoffs. His financial situation was getting worse too. He was now 3 months behind on his rent, owing over $3,600 to the management company. His credit cards were maxed out. The lease on his BMW was coming up for renewal, and he wasn't sure he could afford the payments for another year. Instead of dealing with these problems constructively, Kevin found it easier to focus his anger on the people around him. His neighbors became symbols of everything that was wrong with society. In his mind, they were the reason his taxes were high, the reason the neighborhood wasn't nicer, the reason his life wasn't turning out the way he had planned. Kevin started making increasingly hostile comments about his neighbors. He complained to the management company about noise and inappropriate behavior, even when there were no real problems. He left nasty notes on cars that he felt were parked incorrectly. He made loud phone calls in the hallway where other tenants could hear him complaining about the quality of people in the building. Other residents began to avoid Kevin whenever possible. Mrs. Rodriguez started taking the stairs instead of the elevator when she saw him waiting. The college student put on headphones whenever Kevin was around. The elderly veteran began checking the hallway before leaving his apartment to avoid unwanted confrontations. But Kevin interpreted this avoidance as respect rather than fear. In his mind, the other tenants recognized his superiority and were giving him the space he deserved. He became even more arrogant and demanding in his interactions with them. The breaking point was building slowly. Kevin's anger and frustration were reaching dangerous levels. He was facing potential job loss, possible eviction, and the collapse of the image he had worked so hard to maintain. He needed someone to blame, someone to punish for his disappointments. Linda, with her visible pregnancy and quiet demeanor, had become the perfect target for all of Kevin's rage and resentment. He didn't see her as a human being with her own struggles and losses. He saw her as a symbol of everything he despised about his current situation. Kevin had no idea that the woman he was targeting owned the very building he lived in. He had no clue that his fate was actually in her hands, or that his behavior was being documented and observed by someone who had the power to change his life completely. As spring turned to summer, the tension in the building continued to grow. Kevin's behavior became more aggressive and unpredictable. Other tenants began to worry about what might happen if he finally snapped completely. They didn't have to wait long to find out. Tuesday morning started like any other day for Linda. At 7 months pregnant, her daily routine had slowed down considerably, but she still tried to maintain some normalcy in her life. She had a doctor's appointment later that afternoon, and she wanted to stock up on groceries before the expected afternoon rain arrived. The weather forecast had been calling for thunderstorms all week, and Linda could see the dark clouds gathering on the horizon as she walked to the neighborhood grocery store. Her back ached more than usual and her feet were swollen, but she was determined to take care of her errands before the storm hit. The grocery store was busier than usual, probably because other people had the same idea about beating the rain. Linda moved slowly through the aisles, filling her cart with essentials. She picked up fresh fruits and vegetables, some chicken for dinner, milk, and bread. She also grabbed some ingredients to make soup for Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been working extra shifts at both of her jobs and looked exhausted. At the checkout counter, the cashier was a friendly young woman who had started recognizing Linda as a regular customer. "Due date getting close?" the cashier asked with a smile as she scanned Linda's items. "Still have about 2 months to go," Linda replied, placing her hand on her belly. "But it feels like tomorrow sometimes. My sister just had her baby last month," the cashier said. She said the last couple months felt like the longest part of the whole pregnancy. Linda paid for her groceries and carefully loaded the bags into her cart. She had learned to pack lighter bags since her pregnancy made it harder to carry heavy loads. Even so, she had quite a few bags to manage. The walk back to the apartment building was more challenging than the walk to the store had been. The wind was picking up, and Linda could feel the first drops of rain starting to fall. She pushed her cart as quickly as she could manage, hoping to get inside before the storm really started. By the time she reached the building, it was raining steadily. Linda parked her cart by the front door and started transferring the grocery bags to carry them upstairs. The building didn't have an elevator, so she would need to make 2 trips to get everything up to her second-floor apartment. She gathered as many bags as she could safely carry and started up the stairs. The bags were heavier than she had expected, and by the time she reached the second floor, she was breathing hard and feeling dizzy. She set the bags down in the hallway for a moment to catch her breath. That's when disaster struck. As Linda picked up the bags to carry them the last few steps to her apartment, the handle on one of the paper bags gave way. The bag split open, sending groceries spilling across the hallway floor. Apples rolled in every direction. A container of soup scattered its contents. Canned goods clanged against the floor. "Oh no," Linda whispered, dropping to her knees as carefully as she could to start gathering the scattered items. The floor of the hallway was now wet from the soup, making it slippery and messy. Linda was struggling to clean up the mess when she heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. She looked up to see Kevin emerging from the stairwell, dressed in one of his expensive suits and clearly running late for work. His face was already showing signs of irritation before he even saw what had happened. Kevin's morning had been terrible from the moment he woke up. He had overslept because his phone's battery had died overnight, so his alarm didn't go off. He had rushed through his morning routine, cutting himself while shaving and spilling coffee on his first choice of shirt. He was already running 20 minutes late for an important meeting at work. When Kevin saw Linda on her hands and knees in the hallway, surrounded by scattered groceries and spilled soup, something inside him snapped. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the hallway walls. "What is this mess?" Linda looked up at him, startled by his aggressive tone. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "The bag broke and everything spilled. I'm cleaning it up. As fast as I can." "Fast as you can?" Kevin's voice grew louder and more hostile. "Look at this disaster. The whole hallway is destroyed because you can't handle carrying a few grocery bags." Linda continued trying to gather the scattered items, moving slowly because of her pregnancy. "The bag handle just gave way," she explained softly. "These things happen sometimes." Kevin interpreted her calm response as attitude, which made him even angrier. These things happen. These things happen to irresponsible people who don't know how to take care of themselves. Other residents in the building could hear Kevin shouting, but most of them were afraid to intervene. They had all experienced his aggressive behavior before and knew how unpredictable he could be when he was angry. You people are all the same, Kevin continued, standing over Linda as she tried to clean up. You make a mess and expect everyone else to deal with the consequences. This is exactly why this building is going downhill. Linda felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she tried to stay calm. I said I was sorry, and I'm cleaning it up. There's no need to be so upset. Upset? Kevin's face was red with rage now. You have no idea what real problems are. Some of us have jobs to get to, responsibilities to handle. Some of us don't have the luxury of spending all day making messes in the hallway. The pregnancy hormones, combined with the stress of the situation, made it harder for Linda to control her emotions. She could feel herself starting to cry, which only seemed to make Kevin more angry. And now you're crying? Kevin shouted. Of course you are. That's what people like you do when you face any kind of consequences for your actions. You turn on the waterworks and expect sympathy. Linda struggled to get back to her feet, one hand supporting her pregnant belly, and the other trying to hold onto the bag she had managed to gather. I don't want any sympathy, she said quietly. I just want to get my groceries to my apartment. People like you, Kevin repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. Living off government checks, having babies you can't afford, making everyone else's life more difficult. You don't even belong in a building like this. The words hit Linda like physical blows. She had never experienced this kind of cruel personal attack before. Even during the worst days after David's death, no one had ever spoken to her with such hatred and disgust. You don't know anything about my situation, Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know enough, Kevin shot back. I can see exactly what you are just by looking at you. Young, pregnant, living alone, making messes that other people have to deal with. You're a walking stereotype of everything that's wrong with society today. Linda tried to walk around Kevin to get to her apartment, but he stepped sideways to block her path. Where do you think you're going? He demanded. You're not done cleaning up this mess. I am cleaning it up, Linda replied, still trying to remain calm despite her rising fear. But I need to put these bags down first. My back is hurting. Your back is hurting? Kevin's voice was mocking now. Maybe if you made better life choices, you wouldn't be in situations where your back hurts from carrying groceries you probably bought with food stamps. Linda had never used food stamps or any other government assistance. She had paid for her groceries with money from her own bank account, money that came from the rental properties she owned. But Kevin had already decided what kind of person he thought she was, and nothing she could say would change his mind. Please just let me pass, Linda said, trying once more to get around him. That's when Kevin did something that would change both of their lives forever. Don't you dare walk away from me when I'm talking to you, he snarled, grabbing Linda's arm roughly. The sudden physical contact startled Linda, and she pulled back instinctively. This reaction seemed to enrage Kevin even more. You think you're better than me? He shouted, his face inches from hers now. You think you can just ignore me and do whatever you want? I don't think anything, Linda replied, her voice shaking now. I just want to go to my apartment. Well, maybe you need to learn some respect, Kevin said, his voice suddenly quieter but more menacing. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Kevin raised his hand and slapped Linda hard across the face. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Linda stumbled backward from the force of the blow, her hand instinctively going to her stinging cheek. She lost her balance and fell against the wall, dropping all of her groceries again. But Kevin wasn't finished. Still consumed by rage, he shoved Linda hard with both hands. Already off balance from the slap, Linda stumbled and nearly fell completely. She managed to catch herself against the wall, but the impact jarred her whole body. That's what happens when you disrespect people who are better than you, Kevin shouted, standing over her as she cowered against the wall. Maybe next time you'll think twice before making a mess that affects other people. Linda was in shock. She had never been physically attacked by anyone in her entire life. Her cheek was burning where Kevin had slapped her, and she could taste blood in her mouth where she had bitten her tongue. "You're crazy," she whispered, still pressed against the wall. "I'm crazy," Kevin laughed bitterly. "You're the one who can't even carry groceries without destroying the building. You're the one who thinks the world owes you something. I'm just the one with enough backbone to tell you the truth." Mrs. Rodriguez helped Linda into her apartment and immediately went to work taking care of her. She prepared a cold compress for Linda's swollen cheek and made her a cup of tea to help calm her nerves. The older woman had raised 3 children and had seen enough domestic violence in her community to recognize the signs of someone who had been attacked. "Tell me what happened, mija," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, sitting down beside Linda on the small couch. Through tears and shaking hands, Linda told her about the encounter with Kevin. She described how he had screamed at her, called her horrible names, and then physically attacked her when she tried to go to her apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez listened with growing anger. "That man has been a problem since the day he moved in," she said. "He treats everyone in this building like we're beneath him, but hitting a pregnant woman? That's criminal. I don't understand why he hates me so much," Linda said, still crying. "I've never even spoken to him before today. I don't know what I did to make him so angry." "You didn't do anything wrong," Mrs. Rodriguez assured her. "Some people just have hate in their hearts and they look for someone to blame for their own problems. But Linda, you need to report this. You can't let him get away with attacking you." Linda nodded, but she was thinking about much more than just filing a police report. For months she had been living as a regular tenant, observing how the building was managed and how tenants were treated. Now she had experienced firsthand what it meant to be vulnerable and targeted by an aggressive neighbor. As Mrs. Rodriguez continued to comfort her, Linda made a decision that would change everything. She was done being a silent observer. It was time to take action as the building's owner. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Linda called her lawyer, Mr. Peterson. She had to wait until evening because she didn't want to make the call while her neighbor was still nearby, potentially listening through the thin walls. "Mr. Peterson, I need your help," Linda said when he answered the phone. "Something serious happened today and I need to know all of my options." She told him about the attack, describing Kevin's behavior and his threats. Mr. Peterson listened carefully, asking detailed questions about what Kevin had said and done. "Linda, first and most importantly, are you and the baby okay? Have you seen a doctor?" "I have an appointment tomorrow morning," Linda replied. "I'm sore and shaken up, but I think we're okay." "Good. Now, as your lawyer, I strongly recommend filing criminal charges against this man. What he did was assault, and attacking a pregnant woman makes it even more serious." "I want to do that," Linda said. "But I also want to know about evicting him, and I want to know everything about his rental history. If he's been a problem tenant, I want all the documentation." Mr. Peterson was quiet for a moment. "Linda, are you sure you want to reveal your identity as the building owner? Once you do that, you can't go back to being anonymous." Linda looked around her small apartment, thinking about all the experiences she had shared with her neighbors over the past months. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez working 2 jobs to support her family. She thought about the college student studying late into the night to build a better future. She thought about the elderly veteran who just wanted someone to talk to. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm sure. This building is my responsibility, and these people are counting on me to protect them. I can't do that from the shadows anymore." The next morning, Linda went to her doctor's appointment first. The doctor was concerned about the stress and physical trauma, but confirmed that both Linda and the baby seemed to be okay. The doctor took photos of Linda's bruised cheek and documented her injuries for legal purposes. Then Linda went to meet with Mr. Peterson at his office. He had spent the morning gathering information about Kevin's rental history and legal options for eviction. "What I found is worse than we expected," Mr. Peterson said, spreading files across his desk. "This tenant has been a problem for much longer than just yesterday. Kevin owed 3 months of back rent, totaling $3,600. The management company had sent him multiple warning letters, but hadn't started eviction proceedings because he had always managed to make partial payments at the last minute. But the money problems were just the beginning. Kevin had generated numerous complaints from other tenants over the past 2 years. There were reports of loud, aggressive phone calls at all hours, complaints about intimidating behavior toward elderly residents, multiple reports of Kevin blocking the laundry room or mailbox area while making hostile comments about other tenants. The management company has been too lenient with him, Mr. Peterson explained. They should have started eviction proceedings months ago based on the lease violations alone. Linda also learned that Kevin had been falsely reporting other tenants for imaginary violations. He had filed complaints about Mrs. Rodriguez's son for loitering when the teenager was just waiting for his mother after school. He had reported the college student for drug activity because the young man received packages from his parents. He had complained about the elderly veteran for health code violations because the man grew tomatoes on his small balcony. He's been trying to get his neighbors in trouble to make himself look better by comparison, Mr. Peterson said. It's a pattern of harassment and intimidation that's been going on for months. But Linda was most shocked by what she learned about Kevin's background check when he first applied to rent the apartment. The management company had been desperate to fill the unit and had accepted Kevin despite several red flags. His previous landlord had given him a poor reference, citing late payments and conflicts with neighbors. His credit score was barely acceptable. His debt-to-income ratio should have disqualified him from approval. They approved him because he dressed well and talked a good game during the application meeting, Mr. Peterson explained. But all the warning signs were there if anyone had looked carefully. Linda realized that Kevin's attack on her was not an isolated incident. It was the escalation of a pattern of aggressive behavior that had been building for months. Other tenants had been suffering from his intimidation, but they had been afraid to speak up or hadn't known how to get help. That afternoon, Linda asked Mrs. Rodriguez to help her contact the other tenants. She wanted to document Kevin's behavior from their perspectives before taking any legal action. What she learned broke her heart. The college student Robert told her about months of harassment. Kevin had repeatedly complained about noise when Robert was studying, even though Robert always used headphones and rarely made any sound at all. Kevin had also confronted Robert in the parking lot several times, accusing him of bringing down the neighborhood and telling him to find somewhere more appropriate for his kind of people. The elderly veteran, Mr. Thompson, described feeling afraid to leave his apartment when he knew Kevin was around. Kevin had made comments about freeloaders living off government money and had deliberately blocked Mr. Thompson's car in the parking lot on several occasions. Even worse, Linda discovered that Kevin had been targeting female tenants specifically. A young single mother in apartment 1A had moved out 6 months earlier because Kevin had made her feel unsafe. He had followed her to her car multiple times, making comments about her parenting and her appearance. The woman had broken her lease early just to get away from him. Why didn't anyone report this to the management company? Linda asked Mrs. Rodriguez. We tried, the older woman replied sadly, but they always said they needed more evidence or that it was just personality conflicts between tenants. They made us feel like we were complaining too much. Linda realized that the management company had been failing in their duty to provide a safe, harassment-free environment for tenants. They had treated Kevin's pattern of abuse as minor personality conflicts instead of recognizing it as a serious problem that was driving good tenants away. But Linda also discovered something else that would prove crucial in the coming confrontation. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived in apartment 2C, had installed a doorbell camera 6 months earlier after someone had stolen packages from the hallway. I saw what that terrible man did to you, Mrs. Chen told Linda. My camera records everything that happens in the hallway. I have the whole attack on video. Linda felt a surge of relief and determination. She had witnesses, documentation, and, now video evidence of Kevin's assault. She had everything she needed to not only evict him, but also to press criminal charges. That evening, Linda sat in her apartment making plans. Tomorrow, she would reveal her identity as the building's owner and confront Kevin with the consequences of his actions. She would also fire the management company and take direct control of her properties to ensure that tenants felt safe and supported. But tonight, She wanted to prepare for what would certainly be a dramatic and potentially dangerous confrontation. Kevin had already shown that he was capable of violence. When he discovered that the welfare mother he had attacked was actually his landlord, there was no telling how he might react. Linda called Mr. Peterson one more time. "I want you to prepare eviction papers and contact the police about pressing charges," she said. "Tomorrow I'm going to let Kevin know exactly who he attacked." "Are you sure you want to confront him directly?" Mr. Peterson asked. The next morning, Linda woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since David's death. Today was the day she would step out of the shadows and take control of her properties as their rightful owner. More importantly, today was the day Kevin would face the consequences of his actions. Mr. Peterson arrived at the building at 9 a.m. sharp, accompanied by 2 police officers and a representative from a new property management company that Linda had hired overnight. They met Linda in the building's small management office on the first floor, a space that had been used primarily for storage, since the previous management company handled everything remotely. "Are you ready for this?" Mr. Peterson asked Linda, as they prepared the necessary paperwork. The eviction notice was already prepared, citing both non-payment of rent and violation of lease terms due to harassment and assault of another tenant. "I've been ready for this since yesterday," Linda replied, touching her still bruised cheek. "Actually, I should have done this months ago when I first started seeing how he treated people." The police officers had already reviewed Mrs. Chen's security camera footage from the hallway. The video clearly showed Kevin's unprovoked attack on Linda, including the slap and the shove that could have seriously injured a pregnant woman. "This is definitely assault," Officer Williams confirmed. "We have everything we need to arrest him. The video evidence is crystal clear." Linda had also prepared a folder containing all of Kevin's rental violations, complaint reports from other tenants, and documentation of his 3 months of unpaid rent. She wanted Kevin to understand that his attack on her was just the final straw in a long pattern of unacceptable behavior. At 10 a.m., they called Kevin's apartment from the building's intercom system. "Kevin Martinez, this is building management. We need to meet with you immediately in the management office regarding urgent matters concerning your tenancy." Kevin's voice crackled through the intercom, already sounding irritated. "I'm getting ready for work. Can't this wait until evening?" "No, it cannot wait," Mr. Peterson replied firmly. "This concerns your immediate status as a tenant in this building. You need to come down now." There was a pause, then Kevin's voice again, more aggressive now. "Fine. But this better be quick. I don't have time for whatever drama you people have cooked up." Linda positioned herself behind the desk in the management office with Mr. Peterson standing beside her. The police officers remained nearby but out of immediate sight, ready to intervene if Kevin became violent. 5 minutes later, Kevin appeared at the office door. He was dressed in one of his expensive suits, clearly intending to go to work after, dealing with what he assumed was a minor building issue. His expression was one of annoyed superiority, the look of someone who felt inconvenienced by having to deal with people he considered beneath him. Kevin stepped into the office and immediately began complaining. "Look, I don't know what kind of problem you think there is, but I'm a good tenant who pays his rent and minds his own business. If this is about yesterday's incident with that pregnant girl, she's the one who made a mess in the hallway and then got attitude with me when I pointed it out." "Please have a seat, Kevin," Linda said quietly, gesturing to the chair across from the desk. Kevin glanced at her dismissively, not really focusing on her face. In his mind, she was just another building employee, probably a secretary or assistant. "Manager, I prefer to stand. Like I said, I'm in a hurry." "I insist that you sit down," Linda repeated, her voice now carrying unmistakable authority. Something in her tone made Kevin look at her more carefully for the first time since entering the office. His eyes narrowed as he tried to place where he had seen her before. "Do I know you?" he asked, still standing. Linda stood up from behind the desk, allowing Kevin to see her full profile, including her pregnant belly and the bruise on her cheek that he had put there yesterday. "Yes, Kevin, you know me very well. I'm Linda Wilson. I live in apartment 2B. Yesterday morning, you screamed at me in the hallway, called me horrible names, slapped me across the face, and shoved me against the wall. The color drained from Kevin's face as recognition dawned. His mouth opened and closed several times as he tried to process what he was seeing. What are you doing here?" he stammered. "Why are you sitting behind that desk?" Linda smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm sitting behind this desk because I own it. I own this office, I own this building. I own the apartment you've been living in for 2 years. Kevin Martinez, meet your landlord." Kevin stared at her in shock, his mind struggling to understand what he was hearing. "That's impossible. You're just you live in a one-bedroom apartment. You're pregnant and alone. You can't be the owner." "But I am," Linda said calmly. "I own this building and 3 others in the city. I've been living here for the past 6 months because I wanted to understand what my tenants were experiencing, and what I've learned about you, Kevin, has been very educational." Mr. Peterson stepped forward and placed the thick folder of documentation on the desk. "Kevin Martinez, you are being evicted immediately for multiple violations of your lease agreement, including 3 months of unpaid rent totaling $3,600, harassment of other tenants, and assault of the building owner." Kevin's legs seemed to give out and he collapsed into the chair that he had refused to take moments before. "This can't be happening. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Linda said, opening the folder and pulling out document after document. "Here are the complaints from Mrs. Rodriguez about your harassment of her family. Here are the reports from Robert about your racist comments and intimidation. Here are Mr. Thompson's statements about how you've made him afraid to leave his apartment." She continued pulling out papers. "Here are the false complaints you filed against your neighbors, trying to get them in trouble for imaginary violations. Here are the warnings from the previous management company about your late rent payments and aggressive behavior." Kevin watched in growing horror as the evidence of his misconduct piled up on the desk in front of him. "You can't evict me over personality conflicts with neighbors. That's not legal." "You're right that personality conflicts aren't grounds for eviction," Mr. Peterson interjected. "But assault is, harassment is, non-payment of rent is, and we have evidence of all 3. Officer Williams stepped forward, finally revealing his presence. "Kevin Martinez, you're under arrest for assault. You have the right to remain silent." "Wait," Kevin shouted, jumping up from his chair. "This is crazy. You can't arrest me. I barely touched her." Mrs. Chen's security camera footage began playing on a laptop that Officer Williams had brought. Kevin watched himself screaming at Linda, slapping her across the face and shoving her against the wall. The video was clear and damaging, showing an unprovoked attack on a pregnant woman who was simply trying to clean up spilled groceries. "I barely touched her?" Linda repeated, standing up and walking around the desk to face Kevin directly. "You slapped me hard enough to leave a bruise that's still visible today. You shoved a pregnant woman against a wall. You called me names that I won't repeat. You told me I didn't belong in your building." Kevin's face went through a series of expressions as the full impact of the situation hit him. Confusion, denial, anger, and finally desperate fear. "Look, I'm sorry about yesterday," he said, his voice suddenly taking on a pleading tone. "I was having a bad morning. I was stressed about work. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can't we work something out?" "Work something out?" Linda's voice was incredulous. "Kevin, you've been terrorizing the tenants in this building for 2 years. You've made people afraid to use the laundry room, afraid to check their mail, afraid to walk in their own hallways. Yesterday wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of increasingly aggressive behavior." She walked back to the desk and picked up a letter from the folder. "Here's a complaint from a single mother who broke her lease 6 months early because you were following her to her car and making threatening comments about her parenting. She gave up her security deposit and paid early termination fees just to get away from you." Kevin sat back down heavily, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. "I never threatened anyone. People need to be held accountable for their actions." "Held accountable?" Linda's voice rose slightly. "Kevin, you owe me $3,600 in back rent. You've violated your lease agreement dozens of times. You've harassed elderly residents, intimidated young people, and made racist comments to your neighbors. Who exactly needs to be held accountable here?" The police officer finished reading Kevin his rights and prepared to place him in handcuffs. You can come with us quietly, or we can make this more difficult. Your choice. Kevin looked around the room desperately, as if searching for an escape route or someone who might help him. This is all a misunderstanding. I'm a professional. I work in insurance. I drive a BMW. I'm not the kind of person who gets arrested. The kind of person who gets arrested, Officer Williams said as he secured the handcuffs, is the kind of person who assaults pregnant women. Income and car payments don't change that. As Kevin was led away, he kept looking back at Linda with a mixture of disbelief and growing panic. Wait, what about my stuff? What about my job? You can't just throw me out.